They had the fame, the fortune, and the talent to rule the country music world. But when it came to love, even legends weren't safe. From messy divorces to costly affairs, these icons lost more than just their hearts. They lost millions. Tonight, we're diving into the wild stories of country stars who went from chart-topping success to financial disaster, all because of the wrong woman. From IRS nightmares to courtroom battles, from bad investments to broken trust, these stories prove that love can be just as dangerous as the music business itself. They sang about heartbreak, but in the end, it wasn't just lyrics. It was their real lives. Buckle up, because this is the untold truth of legendary country singers who went broke for love. Johnny Cash turned his pain into music, but his love life nearly cost him everything. Willie Nelson faced down the IRS after his personal life, and financial decisions left him drowning in debt. Hank Williams, the man who gave country music its soul, saw his personal demons and a troubled marriage drag him to an early grave. And George Jones, well, his love life was just as wild as the stories in his songs. These legends weren't just country stars. They were walking, singing proof that love can make or break a man. And for some, it broke them in ways they never saw coming. This is the story of country music's greatest names and how the women in their lives helped shape their legacies, for better or for worse. Heartache sells records, but it also destroys lives. And when the lines between love and money blurred, these stars learned the hard way that even the biggest legends can fall. Johnny Cash was more than just a country singer. He was an icon, a rebel, and a man whose voice carried the weight of every mistake he ever made. His music told stories of struggle and redemption, but behind the legend was a man constantly teetering on the edge, fighting battles with love, addiction, and money that nearly destroyed him. It all started in the 1950s, when Cash exploded onto the music scene. With his deep voice and raw storytelling, he quickly became one of the most recognizable names in country music. He had it all: fame, fortune, and a wife waiting at home. But as his career soared, so did his vices. Vivian Liberto was the woman who stood by him when he was just a dreamer with a guitar. They married in 1954, but the spotlight was a cruel mistress. The road kept him away, temptation was everywhere, and Johnny wasn't the kind of man to resist it. His growing addiction to pills fueled his wild behavior. And before long, the faithful husband was gone, replaced by a man chasing highs in every form. Then came June Carter, the woman who would change everything. Their chemistry was undeniable, their music electric, and their connection impossible to ignore. But their love came at a cost. By 1966, Vivian had enough. The drugs, the cheating, the reckless spending. She took the kids and walked away, leaving Johnny to spiral even further. June became his savior, pulling him out of addiction's grip and helping him find his way back. But even with her by his side, the damage was already done. Years of financial mismanagement, impulsive business ventures, and a lifestyle fueled by excess had taken their toll. And when the IRS came knocking in the early 1990s, Johnny found himself staring at a mountain of debt he couldn't escape. He'd spent years living like money would never run out, buying extravagant homes, gifting cars to friends, and investing in failed projects. His famous recording studio, House of Cash, fell into disrepair, and the financial empire he'd built was crumbling beneath him. The man in black had faced his demons before, but this time, love alone couldn't save him. He fought to rebuild, recording some of the most powerful music of his career in his final years. But the fortune he once had? It was long gone. Johnny Cash lived hard, loved harder, and paid the price for both. His music will live forever, but behind every classic song was a man who lost more than just money. He lost time, relationships, and a piece of himself along the way. Willie Nelson is the definition of a country outlaw, a man who built his legend on raw talent, fearless independence, and a voice that could make even the toughest cowboys cry. But while his music brought him fame and fortune, his love life and money problems nearly destroyed it all. Before he became a household name, Willie was just another struggling musician, scraping by and chasing a dream. He wrote songs for others, playing in smoky bars and hoping for a break. When success finally came, it hit hard. Hits like Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain and On the Road again turned him into a superstar, and the money started rolling in. But if there was one thing Willie could never hold on to, it was a dollar. His marriages were just as unpredictable as his music career. He walked down the aisle 4 times, and every divorce left his finances bleeding. The settlements piled up, and so did the bad investments. Willie wasn't reckless, just too trusting. He handed over his financial future to the wrong people, believing that the millions he made would last forever. But in the background, trouble was brewing. The IRS had been watching, and when they finally struck, it wasn't just a slap on the wrist. In 1990, the government hit Willie with one of the biggest tax bills in music history, $16 million. The tax shelters his accountants set up were ruled illegal, and now he owed more than he had. It didn't matter how many records he sold. The numbers weren't in his favor. The IRS seized everything: his ranch, his properties, even his personal belongings. For a man who had once been at the top of the world, it was a crushing blow. But Willie wasn't the type to give up. Instead of hiding, he did what he did best. He made music. In 1991, he released Who'll Buy My Memories? The IRS tapes, a stripped-down album made to pay off his debt. He even let fans buy back his possessions at auction just so they could return them to him. Slowly but surely, Willie fought his way back. He toured relentlessly, kept making music, and refused to let the government or his own mistakes define him. It took years, but eventually he cleared his debt and proved that no amount of money trouble could break him. Willie Nelson lost millions, but he never lost his spirit. Through failed marriages, bad business deals, and the IRS breathing down his neck, he kept singing, kept playing, and kept moving forward. And in the end, that outlaw spirit is what saved him. Hank Williams wasn't just a country singer. He was the blueprint, the legend that shaped everything that came after him. His songs told stories of heartache, regret, and loneliness, but the saddest story of all was his own. By the time he was 29, he was gone, leaving behind a tangled mess of love, addiction, and financial ruin. Before the fame, Hank was just a kid from Alabama, a boy with a guitar and a voice that could cut through any barroom noise. His rise was fast and wild. He wrote songs that felt like real life, because they were real life. Your cheatin' heart, cold, cold heart. I'm so lonesome I could cry. Every word was ripped straight from his own pain. And behind most of that pain was one person, Audrey Williams. Audrey wasn't just his wife. She was his manager, his biggest supporter, and, at times, his biggest downfall. Their love was passionate, but it was also a battlefield. They fought constantly, screaming matches that could shake the walls. Audrey wanted to be a singer herself, but Hank knew she didn't have the talent. He told her the truth. She didn't want to hear it, and the fights just kept getting worse. To deal with the stress, Hank turned to the one thing that never let him down: alcohol. And soon, alcohol wasn't enough. Painkillers, morphine, anything to quiet the storm inside him. The more he drank, the worse things got at home. The fights became physical, the love turned toxic, and by 1952, Audrey had had enough. She filed for divorce, taking their son, Hank Williams Jr., with her. Hank was already falling apart, but losing Audrey sent him into a tailspin. His drinking got worse, his performances became unreliable, and the music industry started turning its back on him. The Grand Ole Opry, the very institution that had helped make him a star, fired him. His health was crumbling, his finances were a mess, and he was barely holding on. Then came New Year's Eve, 1952. Hank was booked to perform in Canton, Ohio, but he never made it. Somewhere on the road, in the back seat of a Cadillac, his body finally gave out. When they found him, he was clutching a bottle of whiskey, his body wrecked by years of abuse. He was 29, not even 30 years old, and yet he'd lived more life than most men ever would. But even in death, the chaos didn't stop. His estate was a disaster. Fights over money, over rights to his songs, over who had the legal claim to his legacy. Audrey took control, but her handling of his finances only made things worse. Hank Williams should have died a rich man, a country king with an untouchable legacy. Instead, he left behind a tangled web of lawsuits, debts, and questions that would take years to sort out. His son, Hank Williams Jr., would eventually carve out his own legendary career, but the scars of his father's downfall would never fully fade. Hank sang about heartbreak better than anyone because he lived it. And in the end, love, addiction, and bad decisions didn't just take his fortune, they took his life. George Jones had a voice that could shake your soul, a voice filled with pain, regret, and the kind of heartache only a man who lived through it could understand. He was country music's wildest outlaw, a man who sang about love and loss while living every tragic word. His career was legendary, but his personal life was pure chaos, especially when it came to Tammy Wynette. When George met Tammy, it was like a country song come to life. She was the sweetheart of country music, America's Stand By Your Man icon, and George was the troubled, whiskey-soaked superstar with a heart too broken to fix. Together, they were magic, the king and queen of country music, turning their real-life love into duets that topped the charts. But behind closed doors, their relationship was a battlefield. George had one true love, and it wasn't Tammy, it was the bottle. His drinking wasn't just a bad habit, it was an addiction that ran his life. He'd disappear for days, sometimes weeks, on wild benders, blowing through money like it was nothing. Tammy begged him to stop, tried to hold their marriage together, but nothing worked. The fights became legendary, with George's alcohol-fueled rages leading to smashed furniture, broken promises, and more heartbreak than any love song could capture. Then came the final straw, the infamous riding lawnmower incident. One night, after Tammy locked up all the car keys to keep him from driving drunk, George found another way. He climbed onto his riding lawnmower and took off down the highway, determined to get to the liquor store. That moment became the perfect symbol of George's reckless life. Brilliant, hilarious, and tragic all at once. By 1975, Tammy had had enough. She left, taking the kids and filing for divorce. It wasn't just the end of their marriage, it was the start of George's complete unraveling. Without Tammy, his drinking got even worse, and soon he added cocaine to the mix. His shows became disasters, with George sometimes not showing up at all, earning him the nickname No Show Jones. His finances were in free fall, IRS debts, unpaid bills, and a mountain of reckless spending had drained his fortune. By the early 80s, George was bankrupt. The money was gone, the music industry had all but given up on him, and it looked like the legend of George Jones was over. But somehow, against all odds, he fought his way back. It took years of struggle, but George finally sobered up. He met Nancy Sepulvado, the woman who would help him turn his life around. With her by his side, he slowly rebuilt his career, releasing "He Stopped Loving Her Today," the song that would become his greatest masterpiece. The man who had lost everything clawed his way back to the top, proving that even the biggest mistakes don't have to be the end of the story. George Jones nearly drank and snorted his way into oblivion. He lost love, he lost money, and he lost years of his life to addiction. But in the end, he found redemption. His music still stands as proof that no matter how bad things get, there's always a way back, if you're willing to fight for it. Conway Twitty wasn't just a country star, he was a phenomenon. His voice dripped with soul, his songs set hearts on fire, and his career spanned decades, crossing from rockabilly to country with ease. He built an empire, selling millions of records and redefining what a country love song could be. But when the music stopped, what he left behind wasn't just a legacy. It was a financial disaster wrapped in family feuds and courtroom battles that tore everything apart. Conway's life was filled with love, but it was never simple. Married 4 times to 3 different women, his personal life was just as dramatic as the lyrics of his songs. While he was writing hit after hit about heartbreak, he was living through it, struggling to keep his family together while chasing the next big moment in his career. Through it all, Conway never stopped working. He built Twitty City, a massive estate in Tennessee that became both his home and a tourist attraction, showing just how much he had made from years of hit records and sold-out shows. His business empire stretched far beyond music. He invested in real estate, merchandise, and entertainment ventures that made him one of the wealthiest men in country music. But when Conway died suddenly in 1993, at just 59 years old, everything changed. His fortune, estimated at $50 million, became the center of a brutal legal battle that would drag on for years. The issue? Conway had left almost everything to his third wife, Dee Henry, cutting his children out of the estate. His kids weren't about to take that lightly, and what followed was a fight that turned ugly fast. The lawsuit made headlines. Conway's children, claiming their father had always intended to provide for them, challenged the will, arguing that Dee had manipulated the situation to gain control of his wealth. Dee, on the other hand, insisted that Conway's wishes were clear and that she was simply following what he had planned. While the legal war raged on, Conway's empire began to crumble. Twitty City, the symbol of his success, was sold off piece by piece to cover legal fees and debts. The business ventures he had built with so much care fell apart as the family remained locked in a bitter fight over the remains of his fortune. In the end, the court sided with Dee, but by then, much of the money had already been drained away. The estate that Conway had worked so hard to build was in ruins, and his legacy, once defined by music, was now overshadowed by one of country music's ugliest inheritance battles. Conway Twitty spent a lifetime singing about love, but in the end, love and family turmoil were what tore his fortune apart. His story serves as a reminder that even the biggest legends can't escape the chaos that money and family can bring. And sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought in the recording studio or on stage. They happen long after the music fades. Glen Campbell was the definition of a country music superstar. With chart-topping hits like Rhinestone Cowboy and Gentle on My Mind, His smooth voice and signature sound made him one of the most recognizable artists in the industry. But behind the fame, fortune, and sold-out shows, Campbell's personal life was a whirlwind of romance, heartbreak, and financial missteps that would leave him struggling in his later years. Campbell's love life was as eventful as his music career, marked by multiple marriages and high-profile relationships that often ended in bitter divorces. Over the years, he walked down the aisle 4 times, but each failed marriage came with costly settlements that chipped away at his wealth. His turbulent love affairs made headlines almost as much as his music, turning his personal struggles into a public spectacle. Among his most talked-about relationships was his fiery romance with country singer Tanya Tucker. At the time, Campbell was already an established star, while Tucker was the wild child of country music, nearly 2 decades younger and just as famous in her own right. Their passionate yet toxic relationship was a roller coaster, filled with love, fights, and constant tabloid drama. They were country music's most scandalous couple, and their public meltdowns became the talk of Nashville. The relationship ended in disaster, with both of them trading insults in interviews and their breakup tarnishing both their careers. Campbell tried to move forward, but his reputation took a hit, and so did his finances. With each failed marriage, his bank account suffered, as alimony, settlements, and legal fees piled up. While he continued to tour and release music, the weight of his personal choices loomed over him. Even as his star power remained, his financial stability was slipping. Then, in his later years, a new battle emerged, one he couldn't fight with a guitar or a microphone. In 2011, Campbell was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a heartbreaking turn that not only affected his health, but also triggered a battle over his fortune. As his condition worsened, so did the disputes over his estate. Family members found themselves locked in a legal war, fighting over control of his finances, while Campbell himself was no longer able to speak on the matter. His legacy, which should have been celebrated, became overshadowed by infighting and legal struggles. In the end, Glen Campbell's story wasn't just one of musical success, but also of how love, heartbreak, and financial mismanagement can unravel even the biggest stars. His voice remains a timeless fixture in country music, but his life serves as a cautionary tale of how even the brightest lights can dim when personal troubles take center stage. Merle Haggard was country music's ultimate outlaw, gritty, raw, and unapologetically real. His songs spoke to the working man, the drifter, and the rebel, making him one of the most influential artists in the genre. With classics like Mama Tried, Okie from Muskogee, and Sing Me Back Home, Haggard carved out a legendary career that spanned decades. But behind the music, his personal life was a storm of love, loss, and financial missteps that left him scrambling to keep his fortune intact. Haggard's love life was as complicated as the characters in his songs. He walked down the aisle not once, not twice, but 5 times, each marriage ending in heartbreak and a hefty price tag. The divorces stacked up, chipping away at his earnings with costly settlements and alimony payments. For a man who built his career singing about hardship, he was living through his own version of it, watching as the money he made from hit records and sold-out tours disappeared into legal fees and broken relationships. His second wife, Bonnie Owens, was a steady presence in his career even after their divorce. She continued to support him musically, but his personal choices kept leading him down the same road, falling in love, getting married, and paying the price when things fell apart. Each new romance seemed to come with a new financial setback, making it harder for Haggard to hold on to his wealth. But his troubles didn't stop with love and divorce. Haggard, like many artists who rose to fame quickly, struggled with financial management. While he was bringing in millions from touring and record sales, behind the scenes, his money was slipping through the cracks. Taxes became a major problem, and before he knew it, the IRS was at his door. Years of unpaid taxes led to a financial crisis, and Haggard found himself on the verge of bankruptcy. At one point, he admitted that he had no idea how bad things had gotten until the government stepped in. He owed a fortune in back taxes, and the threat of losing everything became all too real. To keep his career afloat, Haggard had to work harder than ever, playing constant shows just to stay ahead of his debts. The lifestyle of an outlaw singer wasn't just a stage persona. It became his reality as he fought to keep his financial troubles from burying him completely. Despite the setbacks, Haggard remained dedicated to his music, never letting his struggles define him. He kept performing, writing songs about the life he lived, and connecting with fans who saw him as a voice of resilience. His career outlasted his troubles, but the price he paid for love, mismanagement, and financial mistakes was steep. In the end, Merle Haggard's story was about more than just music. It was a lesson in how even the most legendary artists can find themselves trapped by their own choices. Love and money, two of the biggest themes in country music, played a major role in his life, both lifting him up and tearing him down. But through it all, he never stopped singing, proving that no matter how rough the road gets, the music keeps playing. Randy Travis was once the golden boy of country music. With his deep, smooth voice and wholesome image, he dominated the charts in the 1980s and 90s, bringing traditional country back to the mainstream. Hits like Forever and Ever, Amen and Deeper Than the Holler made him a household name, and his clean-cut persona won over millions of fans. But behind the music, his personal life was far more complicated than the love songs he sang. A messy marriage, a brutal legal battle, and a devastating health crisis would eventually lead to his downfall, leaving his legacy forever changed. Travis's love story was unconventional from the start. Early in his career, he fell for Elizabeth Hatcher, a woman 16 years his senior who wasn't just his partner. She was his manager, guiding him from an unknown talent to a superstar. Their relationship was built on business just as much as love, and for a while, it seemed to work. Under her management, Travis skyrocketed to fame, selling millions of albums and raking in fortune after fortune. But as the years went by, cracks started to show. The lines between business and personal blurred, and their relationship became more of a power struggle than a partnership. After 19 years together, their marriage crumbled, and what followed was one of the nastiest divorces in country music history. The split wasn't just about love, it was about money, control, and betrayal. Elizabeth didn't just walk away. She took Travis to court, suing him for breach of contract and demanding millions in compensation. The lawsuit dragged out for years, draining his finances and tarnishing his once wholesome reputation. The courtroom drama played out in the press, and for the first time, Travis wasn't being seen as the clean-cut country hero. He was a man drowning in legal and financial chaos. As if the legal battle wasn't enough, Travis's personal struggles escalated. In 2012, he was arrested for public intoxication, and later that year, he made headlines again for a shocking DUI incident where he was found naked on the side of the road after crashing his car. The wholesome image he had built over decades was shattered in an instant. The scandals, combined with his dwindling finances from years of legal battles, left his career hanging by a thread. Then, in 2013, tragedy struck. Travis suffered a massive stroke that nearly took his life. He was left unable to speak or walk, his once powerful voice silenced. The medical bills piled up, and with his ability to perform gone, his financial troubles worsened. The man who had once been one of the biggest names in country music was now fighting just to survive. In the years that followed, Travis slowly worked on his recovery, making small strides but never fully regaining his ability to sing. His fortune had been drained by lawsuits, medical expenses, and years of bad luck, leaving him with far less than what a legend of his stature should have had. His story became one of triumph and tragedy, a cautionary tale of how quickly life can change, how love, business, and bad decisions can tear down even the greatest of stars. Randy Travis will always be remembered as a country music icon, but his journey was anything but smooth. He went from the top of the world to rock bottom, losing his marriage, his money, and his health along the way. And while his voice may never fully return, his legacy remains, a reminder that in country music and in life, the highs and lows often come hand in hand.